For the buttonhole filling with a return, the first thing to do is to do a back stitch all the way around the outside edge of your shape. So I started on my right side because I want to end with my thread on the right side. So you could always cut your thread and restart. So once I have finished back stitching all the way around my shape, I'm going to bring the needle up on the outside next to the first back stitch on the edge, on the side. So there I just came up in the middle of it. And I'm going to go back down on the other side of my shape, right next to my back stitch on the outside edge. And since my back stitches aren't necessarily perfect, I try to keep it centered, keep that line straight. Now the next thing I want to do is bring my needle back out right below the laid stitch. So I'm going to come right here, just underneath. Once I've done that, then I want to switch to a tapestry needle. And I am going to take my needle down under that first back stitch on the top of my shape. I'm also going to bring it under the laid thread. I want my working thread to come under the needle. So all I'm doing is basically taking a blanket stitch or a buttonhole stitch right over that. I move over to the next back stitch, take my needle under it from top to bottom, and under the laid thread, my working thread goes under the needle and pull up. And I'm doing this bigger than I probably would so that you can see it. Under the next back stitch, under the laid thread, and under the needle. And I'm just going to work all the way across my shape doing that same thing. Under the back stitch from top to bottom and under the laid thread, working thread under the needle so that I'm making a blanket stitch. Okay, I'm bringing my needle up right below the laid thread, and I'm doing it just right below where I went down. Come up, and now this time I'm going into my first blanket stitch so that my horizontal part of it, going in through the top, up from above it, underneath my stitch, under my laid thread, and putting my working thread under the needle, pull up, then I go on to the next blanket stitch. I go down through the top, under the stitch, under the laid thread, working thread under the needle, pull up, and just keep doing that all the way across. I want to get all those blanket stitches. I really don't want to be pulling this up out of shape either. I'm probably going to have more trouble than that because I made it than you would if you'd done smaller back stitches. Pull up, and take it down on the outside. And I'm just going to keep repeating that. So let me show you. I'm going to do up next to my next back stitch. I want to go straight across, down, right next to the back stitch, outside it, and bring my needle up right below that thread, and I'm going to repeat what I did the last time in my first blanket stitch and under the laid thread, the next one, and work all the way across. I'm just going to keep adding those rows until I get down to my last back stitch, and I will come back and show you that. For my last row, I've just finished the previous one. I'm bringing my thread up outside the back stitch on the right side. I'm taking it back down outside the back stitch on the left side. And I'm going to come up right below that laid thread. And if I've been paying attention, I should have the same number of blanket stitches as I started with at the top. I may have ended up with a few extra. But I'm going to go For my last row, I'm going to go under the blanket stitch from the row I just finished, under the lathe thread, and under the back stitch on the outside edge. My working thread is going under my needle and pull through. Go to the next one. Down through the blanket stitch, under the lathe thread, under the back stitch, and pull through. Next one, under the blanket stitch, under the lathe thread, under the back stitch, working thread under the needle, and pull through. So I'm just going to work all the way across that way. If I happened to get some extra blanket stitches up here in my fill, I'll just go under a back stitch twice if that's what I need to do. This last row is kind of anchoring it, so you can see it's kind of pulling my frown that I got from having such big stitches and straightening it all out. And then when I get to the end, I am going to go down outside the outside stitch, take my thread to the back, and I will knot off. So that gives me a fill that looks kind of like some crochet or maybe even some knitting, but it will fill up a space.